Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's a pleasure to follow the Right Honourable Member for Loughborough, because although we stand in this House in different parties, there are many issues that we disagree on, and we will take different positions on the Prime Minister's deal when that comes to a vote. On this issue, I think we agree, and I rise to move Amendment 7. I also to support Amendment 8 as well, because we agree on the dangers of no deal to this country. And I've laid this amendment because I am really worried that delays, drift or brinkmanship mean that there is now a serious risk we will end up crashing out of the EU with no deal in just 80 days' time. And I'm worried that we could come to the crunch and Parliament wouldn't have the powers to stop it happening. And I think we have a responsibility not to just stand by. I believe the government should rule out no deal, but I think if it won't, then Parliament must make sure that it has the powers to do so if it comes to the crunch. Amendment 7 has the support from across the House. It is tabled by chairs of cross-party committees, has the support of the chairs of the Treasury, Brexit, Liaison and Business Committees, and others too, and supported by those with a wide range of views on the best way forward. Those who support the Prime Minister's deal, those who don't, those like me who don't, but also those who take a wide range of different views on the best way forward, at least coming together to say actually that what we should do is rule out the worst way forward. And I will give way to the Honourable Member.
Thank the Right Honourable Lady for giving way. Just to clarify, does she herself intend to support or oppose the deal of the Prime Minister?
As I said, and as I also said before Christmas when I spoke in the debate, I am opposed to the Prime Minister's deal. I think it is a blindfold deal that doesn't address some of the policing and security challenges, customs union issues for manufacturing as well. But I accept we take different views on that throughout the House, that there are very different perspectives and views, but that is why the opportunity to come together and rule out no deal is, I think, such an important one. Because I want to just, I will give way in a second. Let me just set out what the amendment does, because I am conscious of time, and then I will, of course, give way to the Honourable Member. So what the amendment does is it applies to Clause 89 of the Finance Bill, which the Government says that it needs for minor amendments to tax-raising powers in the event of no deal. In practice, Clause 89 is actually drafted much more widely than that. Nevertheless, that was the point that the Government has made. And this amendment says that if the Government wants to use Clause 89 powers to implement no deal, it does first need to give Parliament a vote on no deal and to have Parliament's support for no deal. So it provides a safeguard to make it harder for the Government to go ahead with no deal without even going back to Parliament. I'll give way to the Honourable Member.
I thank the Honourable Lady for giving way. I'm still not clear what it is in Section 89 that the Government could actually do that this amendment somehow deals with, that rules out no deal. Can she say how exactly this amendment rules out no deal?
So this amendment provides a parliamentary safeguard. So this amendment doesn't in itself actually solve any of the many Brexit issues that we've got, but what it does is it provides an additional parliamentary safeguard that says the Government cannot use the powers in Clause 89 to implement no deal without coming back to Parliament to ask permission and support for no deal first. Now, the Honourable Member is right that there are maybe other powers that the Government may choose to use. There may be other issues that the Government may choose to pursue. But this is our opportunity within the Finance Bill to address these powers, and this is why I think it is an important one to come around. Now, there are 4 sets of objections that I've heard to this amendment. There's some saying that it's irresponsible, that it's somehow holding the Government to ransom on powers it needs. There's some saying that it's undesirable, maybe even unpatriotic, because they think that no deal is a good outcome we shouldn't rule out. There's some saying that it is unnecessary because their Prime Minister's deal is the best way forward, and there's some suggesting that it's unstrategic because we somehow need the threat of no deal to force a decision one way or another. And I want to take each of these objections in turn because I think each of them is wrong. First of all, this charge that somehow this is an irresponsible amendment. This amendment does not affect the normal Treasury and government operations. those carry on as normal. It simply requires the government to get Parliament's permission if it wants to use these powers to pursue no deal. And in fact, even if there is deadlock, this amendment provides for a way forward, because suppose Parliament votes against any deal that is put, and also votes against no deal, and the government still desperately wants to use those Clause 89 powers, in that event, it could follow the Part B of the amendment. If it still wants to use those powers, it needs to apply to extend Article 50. So, in fact, this is an extremely responsible amendment, and I have to say I believe the irresponsible thing to do would be to just stand back and hope for the best, and stand back and allow the government to drift towards no deal without any attempt to put in the safeguards in place to prevent that happening. Now, the second objection is from those who think no deal is a good option, or at least a good enough option not to rule it out. I think that is reckless. First, the damage to manufacturing industry, which many of our constituencies rely on, would be too serious. One local factory has said to me that the cost of its imports will double in price if we go to WTO tariffs. Another has told me that its European parent company will be under pressure to switch production to continental factories in order to avoid delays. Burberry have hundreds of jobs in my constituency making clothing that is sold all over the world. And they've written to me about the risks and the concerns about delays to their supply chain. And their letter says, "My hope in writing to you is that you will work with your colleagues across Parliament to ensure that there is no scenario possible where a no-deal Brexit is a possibility." And that is what I'm doing. I will give way.
I thank my right honourable friend for giving way and for tabling this amendment today, which is so important. The Bayes Select Committee has taken evidence from a number of businesses in the last few weeks, including Nestlé, Toyota and Airbus, and each one of them, and many others too, have said the most dangerous thing would be to leave the European Union without a deal, and that would have catastrophic impacts for their businesses and, of course, the people who work for them. So for that reason alone, anything that we can do to avoid a hard Brexit, going on to WTO rules, as some members and honourable members suggest, that is the most important thing. And this, at least, helps provide some safeguards to stop that from happening.
My honourable friend is exactly right, because this is about dealing with risk, about delays and about increased costs. And the risk that border delays will hit tight cross-border supply chains, but also the impact of WTO tariffs that the CBI estimate will mean a £4 to £6 billion increase in costs on our exports. The Environment Secretary, the Leave campaigner himself, has said that WTO tariffs on beef and sheep meat will increase by over 40%. I'll give way to the honourable member first.
Thank you. She's been very generous. But can I encourage her just to temper her dire warnings about WTO? There were many forecasts and predictions from business organisations, Bank of England, IMF, about the disastrous consequences if we voted to leave the EU in 2016. Predictions of 500,000 extra unemployed by Christmas 2016. They didn't materialise because investment is about comparative advantage, such as low taxes, more flexible labour market practices. That's what determines investment at the end of the day.
I would say to the honourable member, look, I am not in my remarks drawing on macroeconomic predictions about the overall impact of the economy, although I note that there are predictions that there will be a 9% reduction compared to what we might otherwise be. But actually, I'm not drawing on the macroeconomic predictions. I'm actually focusing on the microeconomic impact on businesses, individual businesses across the country, of simply seeing those costs go up. It's a real impact of the tariffs. It's not about confidence, it's not about levels of investment and so on. It's actually about the real impact of those costs on consumers, on manufacturers, on exporters, on importers. That is the real consequence of those WTO tariffs.
I thank my right honourable friend for giving way on that point. Has she noticed, I'm sure she has, that the OBR said in its report on the recent budget that we had a loss of 1.5% of GDP since the referendum happened, and that the uncertainty was likely to make that worse, at least in the medium term. And so we have a duty in this Parliament to make sure that we mitigate that as much as possible, which is why I, for one, will be supporting her amendment.
My honourable friend is right. We have a responsibility not to make life harder for our manufacturers who face huge pressure and huge international competition. We have a responsibility not to make life harder for our consumers who could see significant increases in prices. The British Food Importers and Distributors Association warns that WTO rules could mean food prices up by over 20%. I give way to the honourable member.
I'm grateful to the right honourable lady. Her honourable friend has just cited Nestlé as one of the people. Nestlé is a Swiss company, and she will be aware that Britain and Switzerland are able to make arrangements for the future, have been able to negotiate an agreement on the 14th of December 2018 to be able to continue even if there is no agreement between the UK and the EU. And once we are through the place where this House has rejected the withdrawal agreement, that's exactly the place the European Union and the United Kingdom is going to be, where we need to make the best of the situation we find ourselves in, and precisely why both sides will want to under Article 24 of the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade, since that we are going to move towards a free trade agreement, to ensure that we don't put tariffs in place at all after the 29th of March. That's where we should be, and those are the realities that are going to descend once we are through the Project Fear phase.
Okay, I would just say to the honourable member that the same sort of cheery optimism that he and others have said about how somehow once we're through this phase and if we're on WTO terms, then somehow everybody's suddenly going to come magically to an agreement is exactly the same cheery optimism they said about how we were going to end up with a deal by now. And we haven't. Because actually it's a lot tougher than honourable members suggest. And so the reality is, if we're going to have this big hike in prices in April, if we have no deal, that is what has consequences for our manufacturers and for our businesses and for our consumers right across the country. I am very conscious of time, so I will give very briefly to the honourable member on the back benches and then to the honourable member for Wokingham after that.
It was the honourable lady for giving way, and I shall be supporting her amendment. Could she help us with this? She talks about the manufacturing sector, and I believe that she has a number of manufacturing jobs in her constituency. Has she heard of any argument that falling back on WTO rules would ensure those critical just-in-time supply chains are able to continue? And would she agree with me that this is very important to those many millions of people across our country who rely on those just-in-time supply chains? And if we fall on WTO rules, they'll be losing their jobs, not honourable members.
I agree with the honourable member completely, because this is just listening to employers in my constituency who have told me that they have bought up all of the storage capacity they can find in order to stockpile, but they can't stockpile more than 10 days' worth of some of their products, and they are really concerned about the impact of those delays on just-in-time technologies. I'll give way to the honourable member.
We're grateful to the right honourable lady. Would she agree with me, wanting to promote stronger and better industry once we've left, that the government should set zero tariffs on all imported components, which is something we'd be free to do, which would make them cheaper from non-EU and preserve zero free for EU?
I have to say, it's not clear to me how that strengthens our negotiating position with countries all over the world who might then keep their tariffs extremely high on our goods. And the whole point about if you crash out onto WTO terms, that undermines our negotiating power. Whether you think that is about negotiating with the EU or negotiating with other countries, we are weakening our position abroad. We've also got the impact on the NHS of spending £10 million on fridges. They'll have to put more money into it, money that they could put into patient care. The police have warned we will be less safe. They and the border force would immediately lose access to crucial information that they check 500 million times a year to find wanted criminals, dangerous weapons, sex offenders and terror suspects. We won't be able to use the European arrest warrants to catch wanted criminals who fled here having committed serious crimes abroad, and we use those warrants 1,000 times a year to send people back to face justice in the countries where those crimes have been committed. If those 1,000 suspects commit more crimes here, MPs will need to explain to those victims why we took away the power from the police to arrest and extradite them by tumbling into no deal.
Order. I'm listening to the right honourable lady, as always, with great interest and enormous respect. May I just very gently point out that we need to hear from other members with amendments in the group and from the Minister. I'm not certain how many more members we need to hear, but my guesstimate is at least 4, and we have 31 and a half minutes. Yvette Cooper.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I apologise now to anybody else who wants to intervene that I won't take any further interventions and will now try to conclude my remarks. So some of those who say they support no deal have said that it is unpatriotic to rule this out. And I understand there are strong emotions, but I hope we can be more respectful of each other than that, because I believe it is patriotic to stand up for manufacturing, to stand up for families who may be on the breadline and face increases in food prices, and patriotic to stand up for our NHS and for British citizens abroad who could lose their rights. The other objection that people have said is that it is unnecessary because the Prime Minister's deal is the one they want as the way forward. I just disagree, but I think the reality is not my view, but the view in the House. There is not at this stage support for the Prime Minister's deal, and I do not think there would be. We have to be able to respond to what happens next. And I finally heard some say they want the imminent threat of no deal to persuade people to back the Prime Minister's deal, if not now, but then later on. But brinkmanship in Parliament is not the way to resolve this and get the best deal for the country. And this is too serious for us to play a massive Brexit game of chicken. The country cannot afford to wait to see who blinks first. So I hope that ministers, as might have been rumoured, will accept this amendment. I hope that they will accept the principle behind it. The government should either get a agreement deal on a deal before March 29th, or get explicit deal to an no deal before March 29th, or if that fails, commit to seeking an extension of Article 50 so there is time to sort this out. This amendment doesn't solve the Brexit challenges that we have ahead and the many intense debates that we will no doubt have about the best way forward, but it gives us an opportunity to rule out the worst way forward and to do so in a way that is calm, measured and sensible, and that's why I hope that Amendment 7 will have support from across this House.